Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, and we're sitting down to discuss what the hecky is going on with PlayStation. Some weird decisions this generation, but no doubt they've still found success. Today, we're breaking down the business of PlayStation. If I were to define this entire generation for PlayStation, for Xbox, Nintendo, and PC withstanding, it would be a generation of squandered potential. Both sides of the business are doing extremely well, making tens of millions of dollars each quarter. Like, thumbs up if you're looking at your bank account, but in the terms of how much more it could be, how much better games we could be having delivered to us, and how frequently it could be delivered to us is where this generation has really missed the mark. But really at the heart of that conversation, in a lot of ways, for me, is PlayStation because, well, I've talked about Xbox to death. So let's talk about the PlayStation side of the business, shall we? This will get into their sales for both hardware and software. We're going to talk about where all of their first-party studios currently stand, what's happening with Insomniac as key staff are leaving that building that have defined them for generations, and even talking a little bit about Herman Hulst, the head of PlayStation Studios, and how his leadership could be called a little bit into question at this point in the generation. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a lot of thoughts to share with you. I've done a lot of research for this one, so get cozy. Let's talk about what the hecky is going on with PlayStation. Please don't demonetize me. I can't say that other word. Come on now. All right, let's start off with sales. PlayStation 5, according to Sony's own website, is at 56 plus million sales as of April 30th, 2024. And that's pretty good given the attachment rate of their key exclusives here. God of War Ragnarok sold more than 11 million copies according to Sony Santa Monica's Twitter account. Horizon Forbidden West did push 8.4 million units on its own, but the entire series as a whole has pushed 32.7 million units in total. This is actually a key metric here because one thing Shuhei Yoshida did say in his last interview with Kinda Funny is that he expected this game to do much better. And we'll talk a lot about Horizon later in this video and how favoritism is overriding what's realistic and what's actually happening with this brand. Demon's Souls Remake sold 2+ million copies according to a leaked internal document. Returnal sold 1+ million. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart sold 4+ million units, but internal documents leaked by Insomniac had shown that they lost money on this project by almost $10 million. Spider-Man 2 sold 11.125 million copies, which is half as many as Spider-Man 1, and their push to PC had seen mixed results at first. Uncharted Legacy of Thieves pushed 569,000 units. Horizon Zero Dawn pushed 2.39 million. Days Gone at 852K, and God of War at 971K. However, I do expect this number to grow over time. PC gaming is exploding right now. It's the primary place to play. And I say that also because, like, I'm a living example of it. I've always been a console dude, and I played my PC last year, like, according to numbers, like hundreds and hundreds of hours more than anything on my console. And these are older games that got ported that also sold really well on PS4 and 5. So I feel like as PlayStation closes that gap between PC and PlayStation releases, these numbers are only going to go up. And in that report of year-over-year results, PlayStation did say they expect exponential growth in that category, and I think that's very accurate. Now, where PlayStation's really picked up steam this generation is in their second and third-party deals. Everything from Helldivers 2 to Stellar Blade, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, although that's moving into a multi-platform direction for the third entry now. You have Black Myth Wukong, Phantom Blade Zero, and the list goes on. This is really where PlayStation has been money this generation. It has really covered up some gaps in the air, like, hey, who cares about what you have happening with Concord when the same month you had Black Myth Wukong releasing and then like a week later you got Astrobot. So PlayStation did a good job brushing that sort of stuff under the rug. But when you lay all of that out, some sales more impressive than others. Of course, the other thing worth considering is that development budgets, as been documented many times in the past, are ballooning, and some of these sales are up to snuff, but many are not. And when you combine that with them suffering the worst ever video game release we have seen in Concord, resulting in a game being pulled off the market 2 weeks after its release, and then the studio shutting down, as well as greenlighting and canceling a plethora of failed live service games like Blue Point, a remake studio doing a God of War live service game, it's only something a boardroom could get excited about. The nickel and diming of remasters and upgrades. It's been a generation of, I think, very questionable business practices from both sides, but I definitely think PlayStation has made a lot of trip ups along the way. I lay it out like this first so that you have the hard facts of what's going on monetarily with this team. Some sales are good, like I'd say God of War Ragnarok, but Horizon Forbidden West compared to Zero Dawn completely underperformed. Horizon also happens to be a cursed series that launches next to really big games every time around. But now let's take a look at the entirety of PlayStation's first party, because with recently canceled games and stagnated development cycles, PlayStation has really pushed a lot of their key players back. With that, one narrative has picked up with PlayStation that I don't fully agree with, which is, oh, they have nothing now. Like, they've canceled so many projects, so many developers have been pushed back, like nothing of significance is going to release anytime soon. But as I lay out this first party roadmap for you all, you're going to see that some companies are going to be ready to strike. But the key to what PlayStation's business is doing right now is these sort of middle in-betweener games, like a Miles Morales style game, before the big one, like a Spider-Man 2. hits. So let's go down studio by studio. First, you have Polyphony, who released Gran Turismo 7 on March 4th, 2022. So it's going to be a while before we hear from them. Team Asobi just launched Astrobot, and they're doing post-launch support for it. That was September 6th, 2024. So it's going to be a while before the next Astrobot game. Firesprite was acquired in 2021, was the co-developer of Horizon Call of the Mountain, but we have yet to know what they're fully producing themselves. It'll likely be a couple years before we hear from them. Guerrilla Games did release Horizon Forbidden West on February 18th, 2022, so they're coming up around the corner, but I think the next thing we see from them is likely that multiplayer Horizon game, which, again, I have many thoughts on the brand decisions around Horizon at this point in time, but I think we'll hear from them soon before they inevitably complete the trilogy. Housemarque released Returnal on April 30th, 2021, and if they've been cooking for a little bit around 4 years soon, I think that you might hear from them within the next year or so on what they're working on. Media Molecule had Dream support ending on September 1st, 2023, which I just think was a colossal waste of time for an incredibly talented studio. So I think this is for the better, but this also means that they've maybe been prototyping something for a little bit before that, you know, right after Dream's released, but to finally shut down support and focus on something else entirely, I hope it's like a traditional console game from them, because I think they need it. Still, timeline-wise, they're still a few years out, I'd imagine. Then you have Bend, who worked on Days Gone, and that released April 26, 2019. Haven't seen them since, and they just had a live service game canceled, so unfortunately, we're not going to be hearing from them for a while. Blue Point Games released Demon's Souls Remake on November 12th, 2020, and then of course we just learned that they had a God of War live service title in development that just got canceled, which just not seeing them for, by the end of this year, 5 years, and this is what they were working on. Insane to me. Hopefully they had something else spun up in the meanwhile. That is a hope. We don't really know for sure as of this moment in time. Haven Studios is working on Fair Games, which is announced May of 2023. And this is one of the next live service games that it seems like PlayStation is going to push out the door. Hopefully it's good, but obviously they've not given us, outside of Helldivers 2, any reason to be confident. Insomniac is an interesting one because, well, their entire roadmap leaked for years and years and years. We're not going to be hearing from Ratchet and Clank anytime soon. We did get Spider-Man 2 on October 20th, 2023, but next up is apparently a Venom spin-off game sometime this year, and of course after that is Wolverine, which I think might be a little bit before we see it, since that game is going through what is an eerily reminiscent development cycle to what happened with Dragon Age: The Veilguard, where like key players in the project, directors, creative directors, are leaving. And so we'll talk about that, but I think it might be a little bit longer before we actually do see Wolverine. Naughty Dog had Last of Us Part 2 released June 19th, 2020, and Intergalactic is up next. We'll probably see that within the next year or so. And then San Diego, of course, is going to continue to bring MLB The Show out every single year. Sony Santa Monica did just release God of War Ragnarok November 9th, 2022. So I think it's going to be a while before we hear from them. And then you have Sucker Punch up next with Ghost of Yotei coming this year, and that'll mark it around the 5-year mark because Ghost of Tsushima had released July 17th, 2020. So looking at this list, I think you can expect to hear from teams like Firesprite, maybe Housemarque, Media Molecule. I'm just coping, but I hope Blue Point has a second project in development, so it won't be too long before we hear from them. Like, are they remaking something on the side? Insomniac, no doubt. Naughty Dog, no doubt, because their game just got announced. And Sucker Punch. And this is, of course, leaving out what PlayStation always does best, which is buying exclusives. And we have companies like Square Enix, which are pulling all of their products, it seems, off the table for that. They want to go in a multi-platform direction. But who's to say that PlayStation can't convince someone else to dance with them, maybe a Sega or something like that, because they have that great kind of relationship of Japanese games on their platform that typically sell really well. Nonetheless, you now have a really good picture of the PlayStation business, and I know it's a lot of setup for the conversation we're about to have now, but I think it's really important because a lot of people are like, what's going on with PlayStation? It's like, that's what's going on. They're reloading a lot of chambers for key studios, but you're going to get some big AAA stuff, some more like in-betweener stuff, like Venom is apparently going to be a smaller spin-off title, again, like a Miles Morales. You're going to be getting those third-party exclusives, maybe even second-party exclusives. But this is all happening while some games, like, for example, I think Returnal selling 1 million copies seems a little soft to me. Demon's Souls Remake at 2+ million seems a little soft to me. Ratchet & Clank selling 4+ million copies and not being considered profitable, little scary there too. Because again, these games are seeing budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars, and we're not even accounting for the licensing fees that we learned a bit about when it came to something like a Marvel video game and Insomniac, and how PlayStation is losing money even in some of their biggest successes. Like a Spider-Man 2 is a questionable success for a lot of people because, again, it's selling less than Spider-Man 1. We read in the leak that Insomniac was considering releasing Spider-Man 3 in 2 parts. We're in for an interesting wave of change here when it comes to PlayStation, especially because Spider-Man 2 didn't even get DLC, no post-launch support. So PlayStation is dramatically shifting their business. You have a good idea of that now. And so we look at, speaking of Spider-Man, Insomniac. I think this is the prized PlayStation studio when it comes to output, just putting this generation on their back. They're up there in like S tier company with like something such as Obsidian, who just manages, despite everyone else complaining about development budgets and timelines. Hey, here's Insomniac showing up, and in the same half year that you get Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, you also get Spider-Man Miles Morales. Like, I just think that stuff is so impressive. And then a little bit later, you get Spider-Man 2, and we're likely going to hear from them again in 2025 with Venom. So Insomniac is cooking, but Insomniac is losing a lot of its leadership. Ted Price has just announced his exit from the company. He's been there since the very founding of Insomniac, and now the leadership is being split up into 3 co-studio heads in Ryan Schneider, Jen Huang, and Chad Desern. Meanwhile, the next big project for Insomniac, in something like Wolverine, had Cameron Christian moved off of the director role, and creative director Brian Horton had left Insomniac to go serve the initiative for Perfect Dark. I think what happens with PlayStation, and I get it because they've delivered generation after generation, is people look at the brands and they go, well, Insomniac's never let me down, but the people who made Insomniac are leaving. Especially when a director is removed off a position in the team, that's not a good sign. We, again, saw that with Dragon Age Veilguard. We know how that turned out because the director is overseeing the entire vision. When the creative director, the one who is creatively guiding the process of the game, is like, I'm out mid-development cycle, that signifies a lot of change. It doesn't guarantee a bad video game, a non-functioning video game, but it means that there's been a lot of disagreements and people have decided to call it quits. So I would read less into Ted Price, who is making his exit after 20 plus years with the company, but I would read more into something like the Wolverine staffing changes and find concern with that, even if I love Insomniac and I think they are going to likely deliver. And even people who made PlayStation have left. Obviously, we know Andrew House left. Sean Layden left at the end of the PS4 generation. He did say to IGN that it was because it's a young person's game and he wanted to hand the reins off to someone else to lead the PS5 into the next generation. But since then, it's just speculation that he may have been shoved out. Shuei Yoshida recently left after he was moved to a smaller role, a more off-screen role, if you will, before leaving, and also insinuating he might have been pushed out. The winds of change are blowing through PlayStation leadership, and the teams that made us all love PlayStation are slowly withering away. I have no doubt PlayStation will still be a compelling place to play video games, but I'm looking at it eyes wide open that, hey, there's a lot of people who made gaming great at PlayStation that are no longer there, and we're seeing a lot of penny pinching, bean counter level moves coming from this company now that is kind of at odds with what they once did. Because I look at what Sean Layden said of like, games need to be cheaper, games are getting too expensive, and what a world looks like if he stayed there and led into this generation with that level of foresight where, hey, if every generation the development costs of games are doubling, what was his solution at that time? What does PlayStation look like if they don't pass the reins off to Jim Ryan and intern Herman Hulst, who let's talk a little bit about right now. I think Herman Hulst has a lot of potential as a leader. but I think his favoritism is winning him over. A lot of, as my friend Colin Moriarty put it perfectly, a lot of hometown favoritism here. For example, let's look at what's happening with Horizon. We just went over the numbers. That is an amazing set of series sales, right? You have a combined 32.7 million sales in total, but your latest big AAA entry only accounts for 8.4 million, meaning that a PSVR game, as well as the main console game in Horizon Zero Dawn and its PC release, accounted for the other 20+ million. That is an underperformance, and we know that the brand isn't growing in a strong direction if you look at what happened with LEGO Horizon Adventures, which didn't sell very well. It was just a very confusing game in a post-launch world because I defined it as an announcement so bold and courageous that I believed Horizon was way bigger than I ever understood when I saw it. Like, if you get yourself a LEGO game, you're likely doing really good, because I only see big brands get a LEGO game, right? Because they're targeting all audiences now. Your Marvel, your DC. It's like, oh my gosh, LEGO Horizon? This is really different. It was launching on Switch. Like, okay, they're casting a really wide net for Horizon. And we saw how it performed. Not great at all. And it looks like PlayStation might have some thoughts on what's going on with Hermen Hulst's leadership, because now Hermen Hulst must report to Hideaki Nishino, who is now entering the role of president and CEO for Sony Interactive Entertainment. They released a statement this week talking about just this and, all the corporate speak. It's been a pleasure working closely with Hermen and gaining insight, etc., etc. But yeah, more overhead now because it is desperately needed at a time where PlayStation's making costly decisions. They're likely out-earning their mistakes, but they're still wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on multiple projects that'll never see the light of day. Despite that, though, we did have the MMO we heard about, which apparently might have been canceled. We have this Monster Hunter style game that's happening for Horizon. This series continues to try to force the point that it's more popular than it actually is. And I'm not trying to dog it. I love Horizon. I think Horizon is great. I also think Horizon is popular. But is it sort of like a Marvel, where it's like, we're going to throw you every form of Marvel your way? Everything from comics to books to TV shows, to movies, to video games, and everything in between, and different types of entertainment experiences everywhere. I don't think Horizon is that. And I think because Hermen was there as the head of Guerrilla Games, who makes Horizon, this kind of lines up with why they're getting the push in sort of a way. It reminds me a lot, funny enough, I'm wearing a WWE hoodie. It reminds me a lot of pro wrestling, though, where you have the kind of head of creative who just happens to fall in love with particular talents that maybe aren't as appealing, broadly speaking, but they just see something in them and they keep pushing talent that people are against in a way that people don't want them to be portrayed as. Like, I don't want to see John Cena as the face for the millionth time. I'm done cheering for him. Can he be a heel? Can we boo him? Can we feel good about that story, right? It reminds me so much of that. You just have this guy trying to push Horizon as the face when it's not the face. And of course, famously and reported by my good friend Colin Moriarty, calling Concord the next Star Wars. Look, I'll totally admit, when I saw it the State of Play, I had a bad read on the game. Like, I had my moment there where I was like, oh, cool, PlayStation first-person shooter. I played the beta and went, this sucks, right? Like, it took 1 2-hour play session to be like, this isn't going to be good. And then we saw the results. To not be able to identify that in what was also called the level of toxic positivity and not realize this game will not be anywhere close to Star Wars. Do you not understand? Even Star Wars in its absolute worst state right now in a lot of ways. Star Wars is still pushing onward. Concord couldn't last 2 weeks on the market. but Star Wars has survived all of these awful shows and movies. That's an enduring brand. Concord was never in a chance in hell that. But again, favoritism. You pick your favorite. This is what we're putting on national television. We're going to basically treat Hermen Hulst as like a Vince McMahon, a Tony Khan, if you will. I'm sorry if you don't watch wrestling, you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But that's how I kind of view it. It's like this guy who's got great leadership potential, clearly. I mean, the head of Guerrilla Games, and to do Killzone and then call that pivot into Horizon and to see how it explodes. Like, that's a guy who can see something. That is a level of a visionary to be there as that studio head. But this transition into the head of PlayStation Studios and some of the calls they've made has been, I think, a bit questionable. So that's what's going on with PlayStation. I'm rooting for them as I am for Xbox and Nintendo. I want the best games possible. I want all these teams to succeed, even if they're going in wildly different directions. It's fun to track. It's fun to talk about. But I look at what they're doing now, and I'm just like, hell hell is going on with you guys? You had the layup right there, and it makes you wonder two things. Number one, could PlayStation just be outright burying Xbox on a whole other level if they weren't doing this weird live service experiment to try and sustain their single-player titles? The other question is, if Xbox just held on another year into this year with everything happening with PlayStation by like August, September of last year, disregarding, by the way, the game of the year in Astrobot, would Xbox have been like, well, we don't need to go out with this multi-platform push. We actually might just have a more appealing brand that people are waiting for, just like PlayStation did with the 3 when the 360 was dominating and the PS3 caught up by the end of the generation. You know, of course, the 360 not shipping as many copies, be damned. I know they slowed down their production and everything, so PlayStation had the opportunity to catch up. But the reality is that PlayStation, there was a mile-wide gap between them and the Xbox 360, and they caught up. Xbox, you got to wonder if they're kind of looking right now like, yeah, we committed pretty hard there. And there's no going back, as I've said, but it makes you wonder. And that's why at the top of this video, I call it a generation of squandered potential. It's a generation of reactive decision making, right? Like PlayStation had the opportunity to explore live service. It makes sense. Let's sustain these single player games. But why 10 plus? Why take your premier studios like a Naughty Dog? Why take your premier studios like an Insomniac and have them prototype these live service games only to shut them down and to let ones like Concord go out the door? Again, it goes back to favoritism and very questionable decision making. So those are my thoughts on what's going on here with PlayStation. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts down below. And other than that, I'll catch you in the next one. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.